what better topic for an October special than Edgar Allan Poe?
It's got all the vibes. It's the right vibes. They're black and orange vibes tonight. And I can't wait to explore it. And I got some nuggets to bounce off of you, per certain titles. But, I can't wait to hear all the details and the hubbub that I don't know and the insights and where he sits in the, all writers that have ever, that you got in your compendium. He's always turtlenecking a lot, right? In the pictures.
That early 19th century tie.
A scarf or a tie?
I think it's more of a tie.
It's to hide some vampire bites.
Well, they say that he may have died of rabies. That's one of the theories. We don't really know how he died, but one of the theories was rabies, and there's good reason to believe it was rabies, but we'll get into that later.
Okay.
Well, when I first heard the name, saw the name Edgar Allan Poe, it was actually when I was in the 6th grade. I learned about him in the 7th grade, but the first time I saw his name was in the 6th grade. I was doing a biography on any person I liked, and I picked Jules Verne. And I read that he was a fan of Edgar Allan Poe.
They were alive at the same time.
Poe died in 1848. Jules Verne died in his 70s, in the early 1900s. So I think Jules Verne was alive when Poe was alive. But
that's cool.
I did find out that Poe, he's one of America's most celebrated writers, but in his time, he wasn't as appreciated than one of those, underdog writers that were only appreciated after they died.
I think I mentioned that some of the streets in my neighborhood where I grew up were named after Poe and some stuff like Lenore and
Heaven and Raven. Oh, there's also a poem, Lenore, I think.
Yeah, and if you ever, have you seen Poe Street or what? I think it's called Street, but down there near Lenore and all that, up towards the hospital, towards Mom's.
No, I didn't notice that.
I'll show you
all these
time.
years.
Yeah, it's cool.
Well, for those of you who don't know much or anything of Edgar Allan Poe, he was one of America's greatest writers. He was mainly famous for his horror tales. He wrote romantic poetry as well, but he was mainly a Gothic writer.
And detective stuff?
Yes, he was one of the first that pioneered the detective stories, influenced Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, the guy who created Sherlock Holmes.
The guys that dress sharp and figure it out. Kind of.
Yeah, basically the guys.
Detective, a stereotype.
The detective that it's not like one of those that follows a hunch. It's the ones who follow basically clues, the ones who do the job right.
Yeah, and they got the creative ability to it reminds me of when you got to, figure out what's going on in a Poe story. You gotta think in kind of the same way, right? That's
the thing about Poe is that you gotta think mainly to get into your imagination if you really want to follow along what he's saying.
The elasticity required to just immerse yourself in the aesthetic and where he wants you to get all gooey and go weird places and be like, wow, that was weird.
Well, when it comes to his detective stories, he's more controlled. Like he does have a twist in his detective stories. But when it comes to his fantasy stories, when it comes to tales of the macabre and whatnot, you've got to be ready to let your imagination bend to comprehend the feeling of horror that his tales are trying to evoke.
And maybe I could say, is this ring true? The uneven ground that he gets you on by not giving you all the pieces, kind of.
Yeah, he gives you just like in suspense. He gives you a little unraveling at a time. When I was in middle school, I learned about Poe in the 7th grade, and we were taught one of his most famous stories, The Telltale Heart, and even that has the detective spirit in his work.
Figured out kind of thing.
The Telltale Heart is about a man who loses his mind, and he's a caretaker for an elderly person. He's always had this problem with the elderly person's eye. And long story short, he ends up killing the elderly person and hiding and cutting up his
Dismemberment.
He dismembered the body and hid it underneath the planks. And around that time, detectives showed up and they started talking to him, interviewing him, and he could hear the hard beating of the old man. Now, the old man's dead, but he hears the heart beating. And the beating of the heart causes him to reach his breaking point, and he confesses to the crime. He tears out the plank boards and he shows the detectives. Well, when I was learning that story in the 7th grade, the teacher was telling me that the detectives didn't know he was losing his mind, but the detectives were doing what they would do during an interrogation to see if he would crack, continue to ask him questions, because he described the detectives as polite, just sitting there asking appropriate questions. The guy was feeling threatened because
he thought they could hear what he hears.
That's the thing. I think he doubted for a moment if they could hear what he was hearing, but pretended not to hear. Obviously, they couldn't hear the beating heart. It was all in his mind. He's not saying that he asked you to determine if he was mad or not, which obviously he was. But paranoia and anxiety, he puts that in the narrator, not for all of his horror stories, but there are plenty of stories in which you feel the terror that a character goes through. Now, you might be wondering, is he imagining all this, or is this fantastic horror actually happening? Take, for example...
And for that person, it is happening.
Yeah, it is happening.
No matter, even what's not happening, what is happening in reality, but for that person, they're seeing through the lens of fear and, help me out.
Fear and panic.
Okay.
From what they're witnessing. Like, for example, The Pit and the Pendulum, another famous one. In The Pit and the Pendulum, it begins with a narrator who is being condemned by the Spanish Inquisition. And we don't know what he's being charged with. And that's another thing that Poe usually dispenses with frame of reference. He just lets you know this guy has been found guilty by one of the most savage councils ever created, one of the most monstrous organizations that are created, and he was found guilty of them.
And he's already a captive.
He knows he's doomed. And he passes out. He wakes up. He finds himself in a small room. He can't see anything. So he describes him feeling the room. And that's another thing about Poe. His imagery is amazing. He feels around the room and he realizes that there's a pit. He almost falls into a pit. And he realizes that his room has this big old hole in the ground, and he tests what's inside the ground. There's water in there. Long story short, he sees a door open up. They put some food and water. He doesn't want to, but he does eat and drink. He finds out that the food and drink is drugged, so he passes out a second time. And when he wakes up, he finds himself tied to a table, and he sees...
Displayed out, right?
Displayed out. And he sees a picture of... He calls it Father Time, I think, or a picture of time. I forgot what it's called, but it's
clock face.
It's a clock, and there's a pendulum on the clock, but the pendulum is real.
Like a grandfather clock pendulum.
Yeah, like a grandfather clock pendulum, but the pendulum is a scythe, or the double-bladed scythe.
I've seen it was it Vincent Price was in one of them?
Yeah, I would say most of the Edgar Allan Poe movie adaptations or start Vincent Price, the Price-Corman partnership.
Yeah.
But yeah, there was the Pit and the Pendulum movie. And, the pendulum keeps on dropping after a certain amount of time. And
each pass, it's a little bit lower, right?
Yep. Again, Poe puts you in the position of the narrator who is experiencing some sort of terror. I mean, the thing is with Edgar Allan Poe, he was born in Boston in 1811. And his mother was a traveling actor. And she died.
And Pops?
Pops, he never knew his father.
So Mom was a traveling actor? So he was just in the art thing from the get-go. That's significant.
And when she died, he was adopted by a Virginia couple, John and Frances Allen, and he went to the University of Virginia. Now, what I've understood is that he got along well with his foster mother, but he didn't get along with his foster father. Foster father was strict.
They educated him. It sounds like it was all uptown.
Yeah, they were a wealthy Virginia family. I would say they were a wealthy Virginia family. I mean, his middle name is in reference to his foster family, Edgar Allan Poe. The Allens were the ones who adopted him.
Scooped him up,
gave him a good life education. Now, apparently, he had issues with his foster father, but he loved his foster mother, but his foster mother eventually died. And long story short, he went to West Point, and at West Point in the military, he did well. In 2 years, he got promoted to Sergeant Major of Artillery. When he got promoted to Sergeant Major in West Point, that was like the only time when he and his foster father actually got along.
Was foster father into the military and all that?
His foster father was more of like a strict personality in Poe's life, that he wanted him to go out and make something of himself. And he became a sergeant major in artillery in West Point. And he was more approving of Poe with that choice. But Poe eventually got kicked out of West Point because of neglect of duty and disobeying orders. And that kind of ended his the connection with his father, because he chose to a life of writing literature, critiquing literature. And that's where he made rivals of writers like Longfellow. But the thing is that this was during a time in literature known as Romanticism. And Romanticism was a phase in literature in which people started to be more open on their perspectives. When people were more into reviewing the past and being more, I guess one can say, being more liberal of it. When you're more transcendental with nature, when you're not so much interested in conformity and you try to see the beauty in things. Well, Poe was a different type of romantic. One would say he was anti-romantic. He was gothic, and he was that trend of writers in which his writing also was society-defying, but it was also to an extreme in which it was dark. And of course it was dark because he experienced tragedies in his life. You know, he lost his mother, he lost his foster mother. He didn't really have a loving relationship with his foster father. One can say that he may have felt alone during those times. He had debts, and his foster father did not want to pay for his debt, so he just left school in December. 1827, he publishes his first collection of poetry, Tamerlane and Other Poems. Yep. And that's the year where he enlisted in the army, and he enters in West Point 3 years after that.
So he rose up in the army, 1828. Fake mom dies. He enters West Point.
Yeah, he was promoted to sergeant major. He enters West Point.
At 1830, he's in West Point.
Yep. So he's 21 years old when he's already in West Point, but he's not. He wasn't there for a long time, and he eventually left
for a year, right? Just a year.
Yep. In 1 year, he gets expelled in West Point. It's not surprising.
But he also rose up the ranks. Well, is it 1 year?
He rose.
No, it's 2 years.
He rose up the ranks when
3 years.
He rose up the ranks when he was in the military, and he eventually went to West Point.
So yeah. So then he didn't like it. He didn't like.
Given that Poe was a rebellious spirit, the fact that he clashed with his foster father to clashing with your superiors in the military.
He had that anti-vibe.
He had the anti-vibe. He had
to do it his way, see it his way, test the waters.
After he leaves West Point, or a few years after he leaves West Point, his foster father dies, leaves him nothing in his will.
It was a little sucker punch from beyond the grave.
Considering losing a parent when you are a parent who you never got along with, there's going to be some emotion to that. But the parent that you never got along with left you nothing.
A little spite.
Yeah, spite. It's like saying, I never liked you just before he died.
Pain, right? Nobody wants to feel that.
Even as a writer, he held his own. Like he became an editor for Southern Literary Magazine, and he gets fired 2 years after that. He was an alcoholic. He was a moody person. He made enemies of people whose work he critiqued. He wasn't just a person.
Oh, that's right. A critic, huh?
A writer and a critic. And very sharp,
sharp tones.
Sharp tongues, scathing. And he made, like I said, he upset certain writers, not just any writers, but writers with friends in high places.
And he dissected stuff eloquently, he spread out the words and really told people why their things weren't working in their writings and whatnot.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up, because Poe had an affinity for codes, for calculations. He loved puzzles that involved symbols and codes. And his interest in dissecting whatever he read. I mean, he had an interest in anatomy as well, but when we're talking about figuratively dissecting the works that he read, he was very down to the detail, which perhaps was why he was one of the reasons why he was a good writer. He had a knack for imagery. He was really good with descriptions, but he was also very analytical. And his analytical mind makes sense that he was good with imagery because he had an appreciation to detail. He had an appreciation to structure in his stories. And as a critic, no issue with pointing out the flaws in structure of the people that he read.
And that was kind of his new gig, was going from working for magazines and maybe generating more readers and whatnot because he's got the spice going, or you put someone up on the chopping block real hard with the words. You
can say that he bit the hands that fed him, and he
riled people up.
He riled people up. Like I said, certain
That's good.
writers with friends in high places and popular writers, including Longfellow and other literature critics. Yeah,
okay.
Contemporary critics as well. But again, even as an analytical person, it would another detail to consider why he helped pioneer the modern detective story.
Says he had the unity of effect deal to just get him in the sticky web of Poe.
You've read stories in which the author tells you of a situation and they go too much into character development and go too much into the past of a certain character, or just small actions that only lead to one part of the story but doesn't really get even close to the conflict, or like basically what you would see in the modern novel, or not just the modern novel but also the novel of the 19th century.
Like what? Plain factual backstory?
Yeah,
like that.
Factual backstory, excessive amounts of description. Poe was descriptive without a doubt, but he cut straight to the chase.
And he had so much of his own style that cutting to the chase, that's one move where people go, what? And then they get some of that and they go, oh, I'm invested.
When you read a story about his stories of a person who's in a certain situation in his horror stories, he tells you what you need to know about the character or those around them, but it's like he doesn't waste time. He says, and now the next thing happens that adds up. As a short story writer, not just that he had to fit in the magazine or the publication, but again, you want to keep the reader enthralled.
That's it.
They need to know what the situation is. They need to know what the character's feeling and whatnot, but don't go too far.
Because it's easy for the reader to just go to another page.
Yep. I'm not going to name certain writers, but I had read several thrillers in which you'll see a character who's running through the streets of a European city or even an American city, and they'll say, and I passed by this place, and I'm going to give you a short history about this place.
But their heart's supposed to be pounding and sweating, but too much.
Yeah, they just go off.
The tangent.
Or a good one is when they meet a certain character and they talk about that character. They give you like about a paragraph.
Bored. Yeah,
until you're bored. And sometimes you just want to scan through the character description. And sometimes they put in characters that had a very little to no impact with the plot. And I was like, how did this get published? With the novel, you're not just going through a fast-paced story. You want to build up. It's like an epic.
But his short stuff couldn't have no belly button lint.
That's one of the things that I love about Poe's stories is that they don't drag too long. They want to let you know that the story keeps going on and that he's not going to waste your time. Imagine someone at a campfire who's going to tell you a spooky tale. And he says, Marty stepped out of his side. He heard the crickets creaking, the coldness surrounding him as the wind blew past. He saw Emily skateboard. Emily was not too fond of skateboards. In fact, he always remembered when he would always ride on his bicycle and he sees Emily on her skateboard talking with her friends that have anything to do with what's going on with Marty right now outside.
Hey, but that's cool that you hatched it out of Imagine around a campfire, because when you said that, I was kind of thinking his writings are the kind that when people read them out loud, it diggles your daggle. Everybody gets the vibe, like just the flow of the words and that's cool.
Once you got the reader's attention, then anything that you throw at them, they will notice. And when they notice, they will have emotional reaction. But the first thing is that you need to get their attention. Again, the idea of the campfire, if you tell us a spooky story, but you deviate too much, people are going to get bored with the story. You have to keep on baby steps as the plot thickens. Keep progressing with the plot, but let the conflict build up as well. Because if the conflict builds up as you're telling it, then they become more invested in the plot.
And so basically we know about, at this time, excuse me, the world knows about, writings from back in Rome and Greece and way back. I don't know how far back, but, hieroglyphics and all that. But this, where he's at, writing now, going through all this stuff, writing has come far, awareness, human awareness and all the knowledge that we've piled up. And he's coming to he just arrived at being a writer and a artist at a particular time where his insight, his genius got to kind of pop the pimple, the psychology thing and, and all these inventions. And
you mentioned psychology and his innovation. Part of setting the atmosphere is giving you a glimpse into the mind of the narrator, to know how the narrator's feeling, to know how the narrator's reacting, to know what the narrator's thinking about the situation. He gives you just enough to understand what's going on, but not too much that you start getting bored with it.
And some of it is blurry watercolor, and you go, what? And say, this guy might not be seeing things right.
Well, think of the Telltale Heart. You're feeling for this person who's losing their mind and reaching their breaking point because they murdered someone and they think they got away with it, but they're hearing the heart. They're like, oh, this person isn't saying for what they did to the old man, but he's hearing the heart. This, is literally you seeing an antagonist suffering. And talk of psychology, he gives you a taste of not just a horrific situation, but questioning, is this real or is this all in my mind?
And it's just going out on a limb here, it's relatable to Joe Blow, whoever, Betty Crocker, to anybody, because anybody can go to the edge of, maybe you're losing it and maybe you get close enough, you feel like things could crack. And he's kind of sharing that with someone getting there or already there. And it probably resonates with what everybody feels like, some, what is it? Anxiety, right? And panic.
Anxiety and panic.
And you get so close to the edge. And
you get so close to the edge in that
people get that.
Well, not that you get that, but what really impresses them, when you make full circle with impression, is when the twist takes them to a completely different place you didn't think you were going to go. You're witnessing what this character's going through. And when Poe reveals one last surprise at the end, you think, oh, I did not see that coming, or I did not that he was going to go there.
No, it ain't. There hasn't been a particular artist, writer that was particularly what this guy is. And everybody was like, probably everybody knew they were witnessing some kind of, genius or whatever. Someone is really just...
As people have told scary stories before, but this guy literally went deep into detail. So Gothic literature wasn't new at the time, but we talked about anxiety and we talked about the panic of the characters in Poe's stories. Poe also, more than once in the stories, questioned reality, not just if the horrific experience of the person is real or not.
Right. Is it a dream?
The dream. Oh, he wrote a poem about the dream within the dream. Is this something else? And around that time, there were philosophers like Immanuel Kant and Arthur Schopenhauer who basically spoke of the idea that what if what we're experiencing right now is not the real world? What if we are entities inside these vessels and there's really the real world is outside of this one?
Matrix stuff.
Exactly. Matrix stuff, which, was later reintroduced because the idea that this is not the real world was not original with the Matrix. It was spoken of before. Immanuel Kant didn't really talk much about it, but Arthur Schopenhauer, who was a student of Kant, or was a reader of Kant, continued with that philosophy to examine it more deeply. And this was in Germany, going around the same time that Poe was a young man, and so it was all happening at the same time.
That's cool.
And again, this was also happening around the same time, the American Revolution and the French Revolution, Napoleon, the creation of the United States.
I like getting this kind of side notes.
Everything was just being dismantled, new regimes, a new way of thinking. There's a new style of conformity. The old ways of
inventive thinking, science.
Inventive thinking, science, but also more important, the transcendental spirit, the ideas that before the American Revolution, people had a place in society, and that place is not just that of the constructs of society, but not just what the government tells them, but because that's also their spiritual destiny. But people say, wait, just because I'm not as wealthy as you doesn't mean that I am of a lesser quality of a person. And so conformity is put into question, and people start revisualizing what the old ways were and how fair and how justifiable they were. And they start realizing, oh no, wait, maybe we don't need kings. We can have a republic. We've always known that organizations of religion have lied to people to assist with governments to control people.
Pit and the pendulum, that's control.
And that's yeah, you can say it was a reference because the person in the pit and the pendulum, he almost dies, but he was grabbed just before he falls into the pit, because when he was in the pendulum, apparently he got saved by a bunch of rats that gnaw through the ropes, and he gets out of the table just before the pendulum can cut him.
That happened to me once.
and suddenly the walls are closing in, and Poe, not just was he showing the horrors of the Inquisition, but he was showing that, I'm not saying that the Inquisition had these things, but I'm saying that they were known for their torture devices, and the walls were closing in on this person, literally moving in on him, and they were hot, like if you put iron to heat, and they were closing in on him, and he was about to fall into the pit. And just before he falls into the pit, someone grabs his arm, and it's the arm of a French general that Napoleon's army invaded Spain, and they saved them on time, and that's a reference to the French Revolution, because despite the destruction that Napoleon brought to Europe, he did dismantle these old regimes. These old regimes were monarchies, and lords were
power systems.
Yeah, power systems that wanted to set a barrier between the people who work and make an economy work versus the
legacy,
the uppercuts, the king, the legacy, what we'll call the first estate. And Napoleon dismantled that when he conquered the Holy Roman Empire. It ceased to exist. Wherever he conquered, he implemented ideas of the French Revolution of going against monarchies, that he basically began the end of powerful monarchies in Europe.
So that's a thick vibe running through the times.
That was a thick, yeah. And Poe was educated in London. He was well educated, so he knew about the revolutions that were at hand. He was born in 1809, and around that time, Napoleon, I think he was still in. I know he came out of exile. He was out of exile
on the island.
Yeah, Elba. The Battle of Waterloo was after Napoleon was born, and my point is that it was the time of Napoleon. During that time, you had James Madison as president when Napoleon was born. You had the War of 1812, which basically United States asserted its military might to show the world that it was not a country to bully around with.
So there's a lot of fear and anxiety and almost panic just in the world.
Yeah, the world.
That time.
The world was in full throttle with political revolutions, with literary revolutions, with artistic revolutions. Even in music, you have Beethoven composing around those times when you have very passionate music being composed.
So he knew about all this, and he's catching his vibe and
Not just him, but also Liszt, also the Schumanns, then Brahms. The Romantic era was basically a huge moment where people had to rethink where are we right now, and are the old ways of the Renaissance and the Baroque period and the Rococo, are these times still the way we should see things, or is it time that we reevaluate? And Poe was part of that movement. But with Poe, he was more focused on the troubled spirit of the individual, the person who undergoes loss, the person who undergoes not just loss of loved ones, but loss of sanity.
And then someone who's been squeezed until they're thin.
He didn't simply question the ruling class or the structures of society, but he also questioned how we should interpret situations, that it's a problem.
And how we process the human creature that we are, right? The psychology of it.
The psychology of it all. I mean, you have...
Because they didn't know, they're just getting into the deep dive, right?
Depends what kind of a reader you were. When people saw, Masque of the Red Death or The Black Cat, they read of supernatural horror or just horror produced by basic instinct. Like The Black Cat is about the narrator's a terrible person. He's an alcoholic who murdered his own cat. And suddenly there's a new black cat that appears in his life. And the black cat just appears wherever he is, and its presence taunts him. No different from Poe's style in Telltale Heart. The detectives are there, and that makes him uneasy.
Like he did something horrible and he's spiraling.
That's the thing, because he wants to kill that black cat because it's driving him crazy. The wife tries to defend the black cat. He ends up killing his wife, and he tries to hide her body in the wall, in a wall, which is also what he did in the Cask of Amontillado.
And there's all the heart was in the floor, so he likes putting stuff in the.
There's a picture
Somebody would check his house.
There's a picture of Edgar Allan Poe's home. You got to check this out because it has a basement. If you look at that basement, you're like, oh, no wonder he wrote that. It's just such a haunting looking basement. You got to check it
dungeon.
out. One can say that you can create an appropriate dungeon. It's not that it's what do you call the ceiling is low, but it's dim also. I mean, it has lights in it now.
It's cavey.
It's part of it's like you can go see it like a museum, but if you look at it, it's like, dude, this looks grim even though it's vacant.
So those walls were inspiring him.
Okay, I would say so. I mean, because Poe, he had an obsession over,
he'd spin out and then he'd get way deep into it before he wrote, right?
If he went there while drunk and he had these ideas while he was drunk, I was thinking that he would think, yes, there, you can put a body there. You can take out the bricks one by one. I wouldn't be surprised that he spent time there, and that's where he conceived his ideas. Poe went through a lot of stuff that justifiably made him this negative, darkly personality, a person who most likely wrote all these haunting tales as a way to, cope.
And process
through all that. And we talked about, questioning reality, especially for a person with substance abuse, with alcoholism, and experiencing all these trials and tribulations and stress, getting fired by your jobs, making enemies of people in the literary circle, just one after the other, slowly becoming an unpopular person. Now, thing is that your work is popular with small groups of people in America. You're more popular in Europe than in America. But in your own American society, you are
fair game.
And you have this reputation of the rebel or the person's like, don't tell me what to do and stuff like that.
And a taunter.
Oh, yeah. And especially a taunter because he didn't hold his venom when it came to criticizing his rivals in literature. So you put all that together and you have a person that it's not really so much that he has a disappointment in the world, but he is more like, man, is this all there is to this world?
And he had to express all these works of art to a fine point so that the reader would maybe do what we're doing, what anybody does when they get into it, and kind of it really stirs you. He must have been so motivated to flesh out these stories and these vibes, and spin his web.
He definitely, I would be in agreement with you on that. Yes,
Intensity.
In addition, that I forgot who said it. Someone says that all literature is autobiographical. That when you write even a fictional story, there's something true about you in that story. Take, for instance, The Oval Portrait. Stories about a guy who arrives at some manor or house. He takes refuge, and in this dark house, there's a room filled with paintings. And he becomes impressed with these paintings, especially with one painting of a beautiful woman. And he reads a book about this painting. It's written by the person who painted that portrait. The artist was married to a beautiful woman, and he was so selfish that he wanted her to sit for him as many times and as long as he wanted for him to paint a portrait of her. But the woman died because the artist kept wanting her to sit and wait. And apparently he didn't consider that if she was sick, if she was hungry, that she was dying. He just wanted her to sit for him so he can capture her exact beauty on the painting. He had an obsession.
Slash make her die.
Slash make her die. And he said that the painting was life itself, but he realized that his wife was dead when he finished the painting.
Oh.
And I think that's in reference to Edgar Allan Poe's marriage with his wife, who was his first cousin. He married his 13-year-old cousin.
How old was he?
He was 26 or 27 years older than her. She was 13 when he married her. He married his 13-year-old first cousin. The certificate, I think, said that he lied that she was 21, but yeah, he married and they were married for, she died 2 years before he did of tuberculosis.
Oh, that's sad.
It was, and that was the fourth significant loss in his life. Now, consider that this is a man who is struggling with his alcohol addiction. He loses his job. He gets another one, but he struggles to keep a job. He writes good stories, and he makes some money off of it, but either he makes little money or whatever money he does make, he doesn't manage it well. At the same time, as a husband, your job is to support your wife, to make sure that she lives in emotionally, mental, and physically healthy environment. Poe was not really a person who was that focused. Now, I'm not trying to be unfair about it, but I'm sure that Poe dedicated his finances to also making sure that his wife was healthy. I don't think he may have wholesomely neglected, but I think that The Oval Portrait was perhaps Poe trying to reflect, maybe I am not being as good as I'm supposed to be with my wife, that I'm not supporting my wife well enough, that I'm not being as attentive to my wife.
Okay.
So, I said...
So he expressed a little bit of his life perspective, a little nugget in that. Yes,
and it's many writers do that. They not just talking about their life, or perhaps providing a symbolic reflection on their own life within the context of a story.
And probably sometimes just can't help it. It's going to happen.
Imagine a person who, let's say a police officer who is interrogating a suspect and knows that the suspect's alibi was that he was cheating on his wife, and he gets angry at the suspect, almost violent, because the detective himself was doing that to his wife. So the fact that, so consider that if Edgar Allan Poe was being negligent with his wife, if he was, and the concept that, he was a drinker, he did not make much money, and he had a sick wife.
And he stayed in the dark zone.
He stayed in the dark zone. He was also a bar bouncer as well.
So that's a hot recipe, and what came out is rad, and I hat tip him. It's cool.
The guy was in absolute pain, emotional pain.
But so expressive, and so genius.
Another thing, the madness in his stories, I think, is him trying to say, I think I'm losing my mind with how difficult things are going in my life.
Up on the edge, that frayed edge that he brought the readers to as well.
And readers themselves saying, man, is it possible that such insanity can occur? Think of the connection.
That's good stuff.
No, yeah, it's good stuff because, again, he knows how to keep them impressed.
We all feel sometimes, and it might not be like, you might feel some weird stuff if like you're out in the water and something big, like a big shark shows up or a big wave's going to hit you, or a car almost hits you and you feel like weird and small for a moment. Everybody feels that, and he pulled us closer to like a dark, like exponentially gnarlier.
Not only that, I always say that art is the window to the soul of the past. By reading Poe, you can see that that's just one way how one individual felt.
Man, we are waxing on, huh?
And waxing off.
Yeah, that's Danielson, right?
Here's another thing about the paranoia and the anxiety of his stories, and that sometimes you lose track of your own focus on reality. Ever been in a panic mode in which, I don't know, like you leave the house and you are going somewhere that you need to be, like it's like an important meeting or a flight to catch, and there's a twinge or a certain amount of stress in you, and you think, wait, did I leave the oven on? Did I lock all the doors? And you're just obsessing over that one thing. When you suffer a certain amount of trauma or a certain amount of stress, your concerns can amplify so much that your state of mind can be clouded. And so your
senses aren't, they're filtered and skewed.
They're filtered, they're skewed. And so not even when you're trying to reason with your panic.
Maybe you're so deep in that you're spinning and it's just a bunch of like trippy fear.
There's a story by Poe called The Maelstrom. It's about a ship in the middle of a storm and the captain's fear of eventually going down into the cyclone. And I think that's an allegory of a person's mental deterioration, that when we go too much deep into the craziness of our anxiety, that we cannot be pulled out by logical reason until something very tangible wakes us up. Well, imagine a person's panic and anxiety being so high that they actually consider that the person that is like, if you're living in the Final Destination movies where anything around you can kill you, and so you feel like there's a chance that there might be an unnoticed meteor passing through space, and it's going to go right through the atmosphere. It's going to go right directly where I'm standing just by chance. A person's fear and paranoia can be heightened up to that. But it narrows down to their state of mind, their mental health. Take, for example, Poe's, here's another lesser known story by Poe. I think it's a great story because it's more of a dark comedy than an actual scary story. It's called The Sphinx. Have you heard of it?
Yes.
The Sphinx is about a guy who leaves the city because an epidemic in the city.
Stressor.
Yep, stressor. So he goes to the countryside I forget if it's a friend or a relative, but he stays in the countryside with his friend, and they do a bunch of recreational activities, fishing, going on walks, reading in the library. But while they're trying to distract themselves with positive activities, they keep receiving news from the city. More and more people are dying in the city and also in the outskirts. Now, the friend tries to keep it upbeat, said, "Oh, I'm sure it'll, calm down or to keep our spirits up. We're still far away from the danger." Meanwhile, the narrator, because he is so obsessed with death, he
starts diving.
He starts diving deeper. He starts becoming more concerned that to him, the idea of death coming close to him.
So he's got the onset of panic and fear, right?
He has the onset of panic and fear in him because he cannot cope with bad news. His friend can.
Yeah, he cracked. He got thin. It happens.
Here's the point where he got cracked. Apparently, he's sitting inside his friend's house. And this is like after, weeks of receiving bad news. He's sitting in the house and he looks out the window and he sees emerging from the forest some monstrous looking creature. Poe describes it in great detail. And he panics. He thinks there's a monster in the woods. And he doesn't tell his friend this. And repeatedly, on different days, he sees the monster coming out of the woods. Finally, he has a breaking point and he tells his friend, "Dude, there's a monster in the woods." And he describes the monster. Like the friend says, "No, there's no monster in the woods. You're seeing things. You're not well." And he says, "No, it literally came out of the woods." And he describes, his friend says, Okay, I think I know what's going on.
So he was looking out a window.
He was looking out the window.
Super spaced out, deep in his own fear filter. And he was seeing what?
This multi-legged monster creature coming out of the woods. And so the friend, says, okay, I need to put this guy's mind to rest. So the friend goes to the library, gets him a book, I think it's a entomological book, and he shows him a description of a certain insect.
A moth, I bet. A sphinx.
Yeah, Sphinx. Yeah, and it looks exactly like the character the narrator described.
Get some sleep.
Yeah,
breathe in through your nose.
The insect is just on the glass right where the woods are. And
because he was spaced out and thin and just couldn't see it.
Yeah.
His brain, he was tired, right?
He's just clouded by his concern. The guy,
stress.
I mean, I think the guy already had these issues before he left the city.
Yeah.
But there can be a point, and panic and anxiety can bring you to a state of paranoia. And these are delusional disorders.
But everybody feels a taste, whether it's like, an emergency deal or just like things mount, and there's pressure points and maybe people are, anybody could, but we all can relate to. We
can all relate to it, but it's tabula rasa. Everyone's a blank slate. Not everyone's going to have the same panic levels. It depends on your upbringing.
And the timing.
I imagine who knows what this guy experienced before the epidemic that made him so mentally malleable. Trauma, exactly. I spoke of delusional disorders, and these can happen when a person has, one or more situations that are so traumatic or can be bizarre or crazy that they can be stuck with a delusional thought or vision for a long period of time. And
triggers.
Right? And substance abuse can even make that even worse. They can exacerbate that condition. I mean, imagine permanent delusions and hallucinations started by your paranoia and worsened with substance abuse. Now, the narrator did not have substance abuse problems. It doesn't say anything in the book, in the story, but Poe did. Poe had trauma. Poe had an inclination for the gruesome and the dark and the macabre.
He was making sense of it. That active mind was just churning things out.
Well, that's the thing. Was he trying to be his own detective or his own psychologist?
Maybe he just yes, even if it was by accident, but driven to do this. Yeah, he had to do it, right? He had to write. He had to
write, like he had to project. He had to process. Well, creating something, building something is one way to cope, to get those thoughts out.
You kind of reposition your brain back in its slot, your mind, and get it slotted back into the norm, to the buckle down, instead of like jiggly and loose and about to, crack.
Well, some people keep a journal to help them to bring, like you said, to reset them, to bring them back to point A.
And great friends do that as well, because they hopefully won't let you go off a cliff if you're losing it. No. So maybe he didn't have a bunch of like I said,
Poe was more of a lonely person.
Lone wolf, huh?
Yeah, and especially after his wife died, the last 2 years of his life, imagine that.
So he was in a dark place.
I think I think his life was a slow descent into a dark place, especially after he left West Point, when it was just Poe himself and the rest of the world. And he had two big enemies. He had his substance abuse problems, and he had his lack of social skills. And I say lack of social skills because a person who gets fired at
he's a little bit fractured.
Gets fractured. Well, I mean, he was unafraid to be very scathing with people. It's almost like he didn't have much diplomacy with fellow writers. And
that was just kind of who he was, who he turned out to be. That was his style, and he was going to rock it out.
Yeah. I mean, I don't think that Poe ever even felt like if he felt out of place. I think Poe was fine with who he was. But on the other hand, the cost was detachment from society.
Did he know that he was doing some like world-shattering, like just historic writing? Did he know do you think he sensed the vibe his impact was going to have on literature?
I think Poe, in that sense, was like William Blake. He was not so much that he's trying to do something new, but he's trying to communicate to the world something that the world needs to hear or see or recognize.
He wrote a lot, huh?
He wrote a lot, but one can say his writing, his scary stories are psychological reflections manifested in these fantastic, horrific situations. Take, for example...
Especially for the times.
Cask of Amontillado. It's about a guy who gets wronged by another guy who likes to pretend that they're friends. And he has a saying that nobody hurts me with impunity, meaning I don't believe of people getting away even if they insult me. He tricks this friend of his in the middle of a festival in Venice to go try this new cask of wine of Amontillado from Spain. And the friend says, "Oh yeah, I love wine. Take me there." He said, "Oh no, I was going to ask someone else to do it. You're not in the right state." "No, I'm the best wine taster. You got to take me there." Well, the lack of oxygen in the catacombs, because he didn't take him to the cellars. The friend was so drunk he couldn't tell that he was not going to a cellar. He was in the catacombs.
Deep in the earth where there's not enough air.
And yeah, so the friend was drunk, and he was in a place that was lower in oxygen than outside. He passes out. He wakes up, chained to a wall, and the main character is immuring him. He's basically putting brick by brick, walling him up. He's going to keep him underground, walled up, putting a brick wall in front of him. And he says this, very funny, let me out. I was like, oh no, this is not a joke. This is happening. And Poe's so good at describing, like, the guy saying, "For God's sakes, let me out. Don't do this." And how he describes the panic of the person who's suffering. We don't know what insult. The guy's name is Fortunato. We don't know what insult Fortunato did to the narrator, but the fact that we don't know if the narrator was being petty or he was a real insult, but he puts that last brick in the wall and he leaves. And you hear the screams, but there's no more scream. That guy's going to be suffering underground. Now, Poe made enemies, and he talks about a guy who had an enemy, and he talks about burying him alive. And it was not the first time that Poe wrote about being buried alive. There's another book, a story called Premature Burial, in which Poe talks about a guy who had a fear of being buried alive. But before I get to that, he wrote a story about a guy burying alive a guy he did not like. And Poe had people he did not like. Was Poe examining his darker nature?
Yes, that's a thing. Maybe right there with the early psychologist and the shadow self, kind of one of them deals, right? And if you took it to an extreme conclusion, it would be this weird thing.
Because when you read a story, one can say, "Oh, that's what you want to do." But on the other hand, it's what I'm realizing about myself. Part of the romantic movement is knowing yourself. It's a fact. Like one of my favorite romantic writers was the German poet Johann Wolfgang von Goethe, famous for his play on Faust. But he once said that if he knew himself, the quote is, "If I knew myself, I'd run." Part of romanticism is the transcendental nature of not just connecting to nature spiritually, but also understanding yourself. Not what society says you are, but understanding the self. It was the stepping stone that led to the next major movement, which is realism. That's where you get your Freud and Dostoevsky and the more psychological aspect in literature. And Poe was a member of that part of the romantic movement. I think he was examining himself, but he is examining the darker, the sadder nature of himself. He wrote romantic poems, Annabel Lee.
Knowing that he had that yin and yang kind of makes you think, like, maybe the whole thing was a head scratcher. Just be like, wow, we can be so great and compassionate and creative, but we can also be so,
Yeah, he was as human as they came.
what are we?
For a person who went through loss and had issues with alcoholism, he was at least clever enough to be open about his issues. Maybe not so direct. He was very subtle.
Maybe, though, in kind of in Rain Man way, like he was just, get some of this.
That's the thing with the Gothic literature, is to say, don't be so foolishly optimistic. There is a darker aspect. Joseph Conrad was a reminder about 50 years after Poe as well. There is a yin and yang in us, but beware the dark side of us. With Poe, he repeated these things. Like with the Sphinx, he mentioned a plague. Well, there was also a plague in Masque of the Red Death, which my theory is that it's a criticism on racism. The main review of it is that it's a story about people who think that they can escape death because of their position in class. Masque of the Red Death is about basically a bubonic plague killing people exactly like the Black Death, only it's red. And there's this prince called Prospero. And he thinks that he and his rich friends can hide in his large castle with towering walls away from the dying villages.
The go-to habit for all of life. It's going to work again.
But just a refuge for Prospero, his rich friends, and his soldiers. And he holds a mask, a ball. But he prohibits the color red. He does not want anyone reminding others about the plague, which is something that very obviously a Gothic would believe in, that people who don't want to talk about uncomfortable topics are phonies. One of those who think that they're in their little happy little world, that nothing's going to touch them. But eventually in Prospero's castle, an uninvited guest is there, person wearing red. You can say he's the Grim Reaper. Prospero chases this figure, chases him through multicolored rooms, which one can say are the stages of life. And he reaches the intruder, I think, in the room that's colored black. And there's a shriek, and Prospero's dead. And all of the other guests of Prospero die in the palace. And the ending line of the story is, and with darkness and decay, the Red Death held dominion over all. In other words, you can't escape death. No matter how rich you are, no matter how powerful you are, fate knows every person's time. I say time because the people are dancing in his ball, in the mask, and their ball will suddenly abruptly stop, and they panic whenever the clock chimes at another hour, as it gets closer and closer to midnight. And talk about suspense. But, this is a trope that Poe put in the Pendulum, the little clock that's death. It's just constant obsession with, the inevitability that our time is up.
That's the word.
We got the conquering worm, that eventually death will come right back for us when we chase after it or toy with it. Or the bells, one of my favorite poems. They're a 4-stanza poem where Poe describes 4 different bells, each one different stages of life. And the stages get worse and worse. Another amazing poem by Poe. Rachmaninoff made a composition of it.
Man, all that is super cool to reflect on. And I'll go back to that frayed edge of when someone is all blown out and thin and not thinking right and all that. And I've kind of, while you're speaking, I kind of mixed that with the whole, there's one called the, is it the imp of the perverse or something like that?
I know about a hop toad. Is it hop toad?
Let's see.
Hop Toad's a story about a jester. I think he was a dwarf, and he was mocked by the lords at the court. And here we go. Okay, so the imp of the perverse. Let's see.
So I was vibing on that, where they're driven to do the thing they know they shouldn't do. They got to touch the electric fence. And that is weird and cool. So that's like human nature. And that, I mean, I don't know what, the deep dive on what that whole outcome of that poem is, but just the having to, getting driven to do the thing, the forbidden thing, and maybe even not good for you thing. That's human nature, and that's kind of
it's human nature, and
to scratch your head and go, why?
If we were to compare it to Rousseau's Social Contract, we look at people like Edgar Allan Poe or Dostoevsky or Salinger, and they have all written about the frustrated or the embittered intellectual. And the embittered intellectual defies social norms because of their vast intellect. We have social norms as a way to keep us from going into our baser instincts. Now, there have been people who have used social norms to belittle people, and then we have the embittered intellectual who think that the social norms are beneath them, when in actuality, they may have had an experience of people who belittled them because they were not interested into the social norms, or not insofar that they didn't want to be some typical conformist opposer.
Keyword bitter.
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 Yep. When we look at Poe, Salinger, and Dostoevsky, every one of them had their share of trauma.
Oh, they get the bitter, you say?
I mean, Dostoevsky, he was epileptic, and he was put in a mock firing squad.
So you saying there's plenty residual bitter? There's just oozing out.
Yes, especially with Imp of the Perverse, or Dostoevsky's Letters from the Underground. If you were to compare Poe and Dostoevsky, both were brilliant writers. Both were, one can say, were the embittered intellectual, and both were also one of those original authors who were very analytical in their own storytelling, that they broke things down. They didn't just give you a narrator, but they helped you go deep into the mind of that narrator. But they also had,
with a side order of like, organize it.
Yep. Organizing and
figure it out and organize.
But again, behind that brilliant writing, you had a person with issues and
looking for patterns.
And looking for patterns in their stories, because even their struggles with their addictions is evident in their work. Well, I talked about the oval portrait, but look at the Black Cat, a man who has drinking issues, ends up murdering a cat and his own wife. Then we look at Poe's own life, and again, it's merely an educated guess that he probably criticized himself in the oval portrait with being not more attentive to his wife's need, to be a little more mature in his work and his own self-discipline. Dostoevsky, I keep bringing him up for a real reason, but Dostoevsky had a gambling addiction, and he was so reckless that that he couldn't really truly take care of his family. His infant son, Alexei, died. Oh no, Aloysia or Alexei, I forgot his name. But it said that he sobbed uncontrollably when his infant son died, and he blamed himself for his recklessness. And when he wrote his greatest work ever, The Brothers Karamazov, the good brother, the saintly, holy brother, the archetype which man strives to be, the superego, it has the same name as Dostoevsky's dead son. We look at Poe, and I look at Poe and I say, what connection is there with him and Dostoevsky? And that is that they are both analytical and
sad,
and they had problems. I think they knew they had problems. They used their creativity to process, but at the same time, their creativity was the basis of their embitteredness as well. Well, not the basis, sorry. It was the fuel to continue the embitteredness, because
it was echoing it. But maybe it was echoing it in a way that them and us, we could process from because it's a story.
Meaning,
or
understanding
what's really going
the purpose of the story
in life, and how the human mind works, and how people get broken, and when you're close to the edge, and all the things, and especially a lot of the whys, like head scratching, like, why is it like this?
Well, with Poe, it's more like, why are things deteriorating?
Okay. Is that entropy?
Entropy. Psychological entropy.
The roiling. Yeah, that's where that edge is, and shit gets gooey. Stuff gets gooey.
When I studied in the university, and I was talking to one of my classmates, we were talking about Poe, and he wrote an essay for one of his college papers, and that the story, The Fall of the House of Usher, was was basically Poe describing the mental deterioration of a person. Follow the House of Usher is about a guy who goes to his friend's house, and his friend his friend is just a depressed person who not really an upbeat person, and he has a sickly sister, Madeline. Long story short, Madeline dies while the narrator stays. He helps his friend Roderick bury Madeline, and not soon after, they realized that they buried his sister alive, that the sister wasn't really dead. She was just sick. And he says he could hear her scream, and he sees Madeline appearing through the window and just jumping on top of Roderick. And suddenly the whole house goes crumbling down, and the narrator gets out of the house. And my friend at the university said that that's nothing more than mental deterioration. Poe was describing mental deterioration. We have also a premature burial in which a person feared about being buried alive. So he created a tomb in which, in case he is buried alive, there's a simple system of steps he can follow that can get him out of the tomb.
That's wanting to stay alive forever kind of syndrome.
Kind of, or at least avoid a gruesome death. Because the guy, apparently he does enter into a comatose state in which the people think, oh, he's dead, let's bury him. And he wakes up, he finds himself in a tomb like, aha, they buried me alive. They thought I was dead. So he tries to get out of the tomb, and his entire system breaks down. He is stuck, buried alive.
Should have asked him to chop his
It was not uncommon for that to happen in the 19th century.
I've heard about that. The graves that they dig up and they find someone with clumps of their own hair in their hands.
Yeah. Just imagine you're just finding yourself in a box 6 feet under.
Your heartbeat got all distant and your breathing got light and you're still kicking.
You pass out or you're narcoleptic or something happened in which, they think, oh, he's dead. Let's go ahead and bury him. I got no pulse on him. But sometimes you're shockingly, your pulse can stop. That's why I think it was in the 1920s or 30s or before that, they made it a law, don't bury a person for like 3 days or a week or something. He had a knack for describing a corpse. There's this story called The Mystery of Marie Roget. One of the 3 detective stories featuring the same detective called C. Auguste Dupin, and which is basically an analytical detective. He doesn't just go with what's apparent. He goes along with what are the facts, and he breaks it down. Mystery of Marie Roget is nothing more than the narrator describing how the corpse looked like, as if a forensic someone on the crime scene is describing everything about the corpse. And then they talk about the circumstances about who the girl was, her connections. Long story short, the detective figures out who the murderer is and tells the police where to go to find the murderer. All based on mere deduction. And this is what inspired Sherlock Holmes, or one of the things that inspired.
Caveman Holmes, a proto Holmes.
I mean, Poe was not just a master of horror. He was a detective writer. And, you have Murders of the Rue Morgue and the Purloined Letter. But as I mentioned before, he had a great attention to detail, and he would break down the facts as the story progresses, in which the character becomes doubtful of their unreality and doubtful of their chance of survival.
And his cool words that reel you in with their style and their pace and all that.
He's more like giving you a really hardcore puzzle on what would you do in this situation, but also, can you imagine this situation? How would you respond to that situation? Imagine you put the average guy, and you say, how would you feel? Check out this new situation. You're lying on a table and this blade swinging back and forth. What's your situation? That you're an alcoholic and you murdered your cat and now this black cat appears. Is it a ghost of the previous cat brought in to haunt you? What would you do? Or
it was kind of a shocking news style that people probably want to pass along and go, look you need to read this because this guy writes different and it brings up some taboo and it's spicy and it's just going to stir you up.
Poe wants to stir you up, but he hopes that people can rely on their wits because he loved puzzles also.
Yeah, so he had the right brain, left brain thing going on, both kicking it, and he merged them together in this creative flow with all the look how thinky I am, and let's figure it out. Let's be innovative and it's kind of both, right?
Look how thinky I am. Let's be innovative.
And there's a measure of people's morality through the whole thing, all of them. Like there's a measure going on in the background of all the stories. That's kind of cool.
he's not simply trying to scare you. He's trying to have you open your mind and consider the circumstance of the fantastic and frightening tale that he tells you. The greater the challenge is not trying to solve whatever conflict is in the story, but the conflict within the character, especially of the reader. Imagine if the reader finds a little of themselves in that narrator.
Yeah, and that's like a mankind kind of thing, like that weird. It's a cool phenomenon. People know when they feel it, right? And that connectedness must be just attractive, even though all this stuff is dark and explores the dark side of people and, stressful situations and bad outcomes. But the way that it kind of pulls people together because it fascinates, and like it's doing right here, right now. So is that kind of what we're, this is October and there's all these spooky vibes, scary vibes, how do you say it? The macabre?
The macabre.
And not the macabre.
The chupacabra.
Yeah, okay. Abracadabra.
Chupacabra.
So Halloween-y vibes, and Halloween and dark stuff. And now you're saying mental health. Is that where this whole thing is kind of pointed?
That's what it's pointed is.
For this episode, kind of?
Yes. More than anything is that with Poe, we see the breaking down of mental health. We see panic and anxiety leading to paranoia.
And isolation.
I mean, first we consider trauma, whether it's loss, whether it's abuse, how it leads to unwise choice.
Even if it's perceived trauma, but he had real trauma.
He had real trauma. But I'm talking about actual trauma, and which leads us to how trauma can easily lead us to making certain life choices that are unhealthy, whether it's addiction or overeating or
touching the electric fence.
And then you have a person like Poe who had the same pattern. But Poe, I don't know if he had his hallucinations, but they did say that he spoke as if he was hallucinating.
You mean like if you're hanging out with him, you'd think he was like seeing something that wasn't there?
Oh, no, on the day that he died, the last people who spoke with him, he spoke as if he was hallucinating. We were talking about a traumatized, alcoholic, creative genius who also wants to communicate with us.
That's cool, man.
And then we touch upon the last part, grief. Grief is a form of anxiety, but anxiety can be a symptom of grief or can come along with grief.
And keep multiplying each other, like with the investment and with the deterioration of your, what's real, what's not real, and just a tired mind, a tired spirit.
Well, I mean, it's a retired
collapse.
mind. Well, that's the thing. His greatest poem ever, The Raven, is a confession of that collapse.
Okay.
Now, the thing is with The Raven is that it's a poem about loss. It's an expression about loss. It's about a man that is telling the reader how deep down, how sad he is, how much he is struggling with the depression that he's going through.
He's in the depths.
Once upon a midnight dreary, while I ponder weak and weary over many quaint and curious volumes of forgotten lore. So the story begins with a guy who he is reading, he's in his room, he is sleeping while reading old tales, and he's suddenly awoken by a tapping as the sun was gently rapping by my chamber door. It eventually is a raven that comes out from the outdoors into his chamber, and he jumps on a bust of the goddess Pallas, and it just stares at him. The guy thinks that the raven might be a spirit of his loved one or other critics say that it was the spirit of a messenger from the dead.
It's a spirit and nature combo right there, a little tie up.
Yep. And because, again, this is more like his most spiritual poem. The guy talks to the raven, asking him questions if he will ever see the woman that he loved, Lenore. And he keeps on making statements, then demands, and the raven keeps croaking, nevermore, nevermore. When Poe wrote that poem, he said that he wanted to create a poem that had precisions and rigid consequence of a mathematical problem. He wanted to again, this is a guy who wants to help us break down analytical details. But what mathematical problem is he talking about if we're talking about the Raven? The issue is loss. This is a guy who hasn't gotten over a loss. And he has a bird that shows up. Grief turns to anxiety. Anxiety turns to paranoia. And then we have a person who's is in a state of delusion, thinking that this bird might be some sort of visitor, because it didn't occur to him. Sometimes if I open a window, a bird might fly in. He thinks that bird was waiting for me to open. I think he's come to bring me a message about my wife.
Isolation.
You mentioned yin and yang. Poe, when he created the Raven, he wanted to have a single effect. He wanted to have a single effect of beauty, but beauty perceived through melancholy. The beauty is of how deep love goes for a person who has lost someone. It's sad, but at the same time, it is a beautiful spirit, the tortured one, the spirit who seeks peace or redemption, that there's a beauty in that morosity. This guy is devoid of reason. He's going down that descent.
He's past being normal.
He's past being normal. And no detail is put there for no reason. It's like Chekhov's gun. If you put a gun into play, that gun has to be used by the end of the play. In this case, the Raven is on top of a bust, the head statue of the goddess Pallas, who was Pallas, a goddess of wisdom. And this bird, famously being associated with symbols of death, is on top of the statue of wisdom, as if there's a death in wisdom. That the guy's out of his senses, and no sheer wisdom can get him out of it. And two, that when it comes to loss and grief, in Poe's case, there's very little that wisdom can help when it comes to coping. Now, you can say, yes, there is, the wisdom can help you cope with loss. There's meditation. There's the Eightfold Path. There are Eastern religions.
Well, now we know a lot of recipes to get better, but back then it was all new, right?
Back then it was all new. I mean, this was a man who was born in New England and grew up in Virginia, and he spent his last days in Baltimore, but he was going back and forth. He had a limited interest in Western culture. He did have some interest in the Eastern cultures. I wonder if he ever heard or read of Buddha and the Four Noble Truths and the Eightfold Path. Imagine
he went to West Point, so
he went to West Point, and he had to study it. To be a sergeant major in artillery, you have to be good with logistics. You have to be good at math, not just being a good leader, but also when you're in the Army, you're trained to navigate as well.
So he had a lot of skill sets, like he is practical but artful.
But all that knowledge didn't save him from his addiction, didn't save him from his losses, because there's more than knowledge. It's coping. You can use your knowledge to reinforce your coping, but there's more than just knowing to protect you from the difficulties of insecurity and depression. There's also, you need to be able to understand your mind, to be able to analyze. That's why therapy is good for people.
And so in these stories where you're vibing on it like that, it's almost like before you have that lifeline to understand, how to pull yourself out. It's like
had Poe gone farther in his voyages outside of Europe, because he did go to England, but that was as far as he went. And he wrote stories about people traveling, the adventures of Arthur Gordon Pym. The kind of culture that he had at that time was not good enough to help him cope.
But he knew that, apparently he knew that clinging to wisdom is the ultimate, get out of death card. He knew that was grasping at straws, right? He knew that wasn't gonna. Yeah, he kind of said that.
Yeah, he knew that there had to be a point in which the person had to heal themselves, but it's hard to heal yourself when you doubt you will ever be cured.
Such a nebulous area back then compared to now.
Well, around that time, talking about a nebulous area when people are having issues with their own addictions and with their own struggles. Around that time was the temperance movement, when people in the United States started advocating against the use of alcohol, to abstain from alcohol. The temperance movement was happening around that time, and I believe Poe tried to join that movement at a time. Now, in the poem, The narrator mentions Nepenthe. It's a mythical medication. It helps people forget their sorrows. I think any of us would like to have that. We kind of have something like that nowadays, but it doesn't really help us with our physical or mental health. These new medication to help us forget our sorrows, there's always a side effect.
It's a bad Band-Aid.
It's a bad Band-Aid, and the worst aspect is dependency on it.
Yeah, yep, it's bad.
The best medication is one that cures you, not the one that keeps you dependent on multiple treatments. Whether it's Abilify or Lexapro or whatever they've concocted in the last 15 years. Do you think that he would have gone for it? To take these pills it wouldn't take away his sorrows. It would just reorganize the chemical imbalance in his brain.
Okay, we go to one alternate universe and we give him all that knowledge. And then we go to another one that's 40 years later and show him that. And then 50 years later, then... Because when all those drugs came out, people were like, I don't know, do they work? But it seems like...
He was desperate. He needed someone to hear him, to hear his pain, to put out his frustrations. But at the same time, he did not want to be crawling for it. He had to put it in a poem.
And he'd been writing forever. And so just the habit of his hand holding that pen and instantly, putting it down, he was probably had that, his chops were hot. So...
Whether depending on the situation too.
So he laid it down probably. Different ways to have a process to have like an art.
He masquerades it all in sad poems and horrific tales. With him, there's logos and there's ethos. There's reasoning and there's emotion. And while emotional intelligence would be something that all of us should do on a daily basis, there are steps. You can't just jump to being reasonable.
Yeah, when you're all tore up, it usually takes a minute to get there, and it's weird and hard to say, it might take a minute to backwards all this stuff and have that patience in a moment when you're thin, So, that's when good people and good places to seek help,
Poe was trying to seek help in his own subtle way. And that's the thing, the subtleties what got him. Maybe his pride. But when he's not at the point where he's grieving, he's shut down, but he wants to reach out. Grievance requires being able to share sorrow with that person. Help them on the small things. Don't try to be a doctor, but help them out with their life, like running their errands or whatnot.
It is sad. Let's keep going.
Yeah, it's sad. Let's keep going, but I'm here to help you out in any way I can. Of course, being patient with them. They're not going to recover overnight. But Poe, did he get any of that? He didn't. The narrator had someone who was listening to him. He had the Raven, but the Raven didn't say, don't worry about it. I'm here to help you. No, it's more like he had this pain inside him the whole time. The first visitor he gets, some blackbird flies in, and the guy starts telling this blackbird, I've had it. I need to tell somebody of how I'm feeling, so I'm going to tell this bird here. And every time he finishes telling him one point, the bird says, nevermore. So imagine a person who's grieving, and they're telling you how they're feeling in their grief, and you tell them, that's not going to happen. Yeah, that's not going to happen.
Just denied.
Denied is like
no connection.
Or what else?
Yeah.
So
muted grayness.
The Raven, the worst friend to have when you're depressed.
And plus how they look, they're so just and the way they move and they're smart,
Well, that's the thing. Ravens are one of the smartest birds. And again, one of the smartest birds that exists on top of the statue of wisdom. The raven gets a bad rap for being the symbol of death, but
taboo.
Yeah, especially in those times during the Second Great Awakening. I mean, this is also the time when the Mormons were on the rise as well. Things were changing rapidly.
Dynamic, yes.
So many dynamics. And with Poe, he was haunted by loss. By the last 2 years of his life, he was a lonely person. And the Raven was not only a story, it was about a guy who was haunted by loss. That's Poe's real confession. In the last year of his life, he was going to New York from Richmond, because I think he had a cottage in New York, and he wanted to spend time there. And he made a stop in Baltimore, Maryland.
1849.
That was an election year. And the last time, his last sighting before his death was September 27th. There's no mention of his whereabouts or his activities between September 27th and October 3rd. On October 3rd, someone saw him sitting outside of a tavern and he looked sick.
Okay.
They said that his last words were, "Lord, help my poor soul." Those were his last words, they say. "Lord, help my poor soul." But this is not fully supported, just as it was supposedly said that he uttered the name Reynolds as he died. Now, as to his death, we're not 100% sure what he died of, and we're not 100% sure why he was delirious before he died, because he was delirious as he was dying.
That could be just regular.
No, they say it was alcohol poisoning.
A combo, everything, huh? He was just shutting down.
They say it was alcohol poisoning. Also read from another source that it was rabies. Now, with rabies,
hydrophobia.
And this was before they even found a vaccine for rabies.
You get the froths, you get the foamy mouth, and
you get the foamy. First, you get the fever and the body pains, and then you get the frothing of the mouth. You suffer from hydrophobia.
You get aggressive, maybe.
You get aggressive, like in all the other slobbering death.
Yeah.
And
Old Yeller.
No, hydrophobia.
Everybody cried at Old Yeller.
Yeah. So why do I bring up rabies? Because they said that during his final days, those who knew him, Poe had an aversion to water, and he also had the habit of taking in stray animals.
Okay.
Now, getting bit or scratched by a stray is enough to get you rabies. What are the chances in a world before the rabies vaccine was invented? How many animals had rabies?
It licked his mustache when he was passed out.
Yeah, could have been. And we don't know how solid this testimony is, but it's something to consider. The delirium and hallucinations are like one of the last parts of the dying phase in rabies. And that he was described to have been outside a bar. They said he had phrenitis or congestion of the brain, or a cerebral inflammation, or
AKA we
fever.
Don't know.
Okay, so here's a quote that I found. It says, on September 27th, 1849, Edgar Allan Poe set out from Richmond to Philadelphia with the intention of heading to his cottage in the Bronx, New York City. Next, on October 3rd, a printer named Joseph Walker recognized Poe in what was described as a delirious state outside of a tavern called Gunner's Hall in Baltimore. It should be noted that the tavern, also known as Ryan's Tavern, was at the time host to vote for collectors in the 1849 election. So it was common for taverns to hold elections. When Walker asked Poe, who was going through the deliriums, if there's anything he could call for him, a contact. And Poe said of an editor he knew called Joseph Snodgrass. So Joseph Snodgrass was told, hey, do you know an Edgar Allan Poe? Because we found him outside a bar. He's delirious. He looks very sick. He needs help. And Poe was taken to Washington Medical College. Poe was kept alone in a windowless room with one doctor, Dr. John Moran. Now, he was there for 4 days because on October 7th, he died. He just died at the age of 40.
At the hospital.
At the hospital at Washington College. He died on October 7th, 1849. This doctor used Poe's death as an example about the dangerous effects of alcohol consumption, because John Moran was a member of the temperance movement, a time when people were rallying against alcohol consumption. Again, we don't know what killed Poe. They didn't have the technology to know what killed him. So he just jumped to the conclusion, alcohol poisoning.
But he knew that alcohol was probably a contributor no matter what.
Yeah, I mean, even if it was rabies or...
Oh, rabies, yeah, that's right.
Someone said a theory that he was poisoned because he was also politically involved in this election.
He's at a bar.
I mean, it'd be a good basis for a thriller. Poe investigating some sort of election, and he is a detective writer, and suddenly he gets killed in the process. Here's the cool part. Poe joined the temperance movement. He joined a branch called the Sons of Temperance. You have this guy who joined the temperance movement.
Trying to get your drink on.
Is that him trying to make a change? Is that him trying to seek some sort of hope?
It wasn't no baby step.
Suddenly you die of a fatal dose of alcohol poisoning. I agree with you. I think that the alcohol made it worse. What it does to your immune system.
Yeah. Yeah, how old was he?
40 years old. 40 years old.
Yeah, he probably been pickled for a hot minute, like a decade maybe.
Yeah.
Or more.
That's the thing. He put himself in the spot. He witnessed his own deterioration. And he wrote
He got squeezed.
I wonder maybe he did that on purpose, whether he consumed a fatal dose of alcohol to just, to kill himself, or maybe he did have rabies or something, whatever was going on. Alcohol caused an inflammation of the brain. I mean, alcohol poisoning can give you delirium.
It's cool how, the vibe that he left, the echo that's still going on is, making us talk about all this cool stuff and seeing how he swam through life as an artist and as a human. And it's, I think it's a positive outcome. Hat tip to Edgar Allan Poe.
Hat tip to Edgar Allan Poe. He presented us the culture clashes of his time.
I like the way you're putting this.
But through the lens of one who is traumatized, the one who is suffering through loss, substance addiction, someone who is struggling with coping with reality and his own sanity. And so, again, he presents us these stories.
Taxed hard. And
I circle back now to when I told you that I heard of Edgar Allan Poe when I read of Jules Verne's biography, the father of science fiction.
And I remember as a youngster hearing an audio deal of the Telltale Heart, and the thumping and the narration. I always remember hearing like a record of that.
There's always something about the intellectual that Poe strikes. There are those who are impressed by his imagery and they're enraptured by the horror story. And then there are those of the analytical mind, the mathematical scientific mind, whether you're an engineer or a mathematician or someone who fancies the fields, and you see a psychological puzzle that Poe presents you in the Telltale Heart, and the Sphinx, and the Cask of Amontillado, Masque of the Red Death, the Black Cat, Murders in the Rue Morgue, everything. There you have it. An intentional pioneer of psychoanalysis in literature. And that's for Edgar Allan Poe. And there are many Edgar Allan Poe fans out there, and as among one of them, I salute him.
Same huge hat tip, inspired Edgar Allan Poe. October, we salute you.